Hey folks, quick check-in here as we work through, oh god, where are we? I don't even know. Great job on the Wordle, by the way, so thanks very much, Shannon. Very cool. I'm looking at it again. It grabs my attention every time I log into our course. But anyway, it is Tuesday, September 11th right now. So we are currently in Unit 4, which is looking at Wollstonecraft, primarily Wollstonecraft, and then Anna Letitia Barbald as well. A couple of female, sort of pre-romantic writers, although our focus is really on Wollstonecraft, and again primarily because of the link she provides us between, as is shown in the unit, between Milton and this focus on reason, which is very much that Enlightenment kind of pre-romantic thinking, but with this energy or this impulse towards free will and self-determination and kind of revolution and rebellion when that's required to enact principles of free will and self-determination. And so she embraces obviously the reason part of the argument in terms of like how would we reorganize society to be more gender equal. Well, we would apply our reason to this basic problem, and the result of our logical thinking would be that it benefits everybody, not just women, when women are empowered to do more than just learn to knit and sew and find a good husband or whatever's going on. I mean, the problem, obviously is that the common sense logic of that argument depends on people seeing that there is a problem with gender inequality to begin with, which some people didn't at the time, most people didn't at the time that Wollstonecraft was writing, which is what makes her writing even more kind of spectacular and heroic. But sadly, some people still don't really see that problem. I won't even talk about that issue, but anyway. Our next unit then is William Blake, Unit 5, and he is really the first true romantic poet that we get to. In fact, the early publication of his works is again often used to date the beginning of the Romantic period. Partly he's just an unusual guy, and his artwork, if you haven't looked at it already, when you do, it just has this very unique, unusual, unconventional quality to it, both in terms of how it looks, but also how it's produced, which is a lot of what we will focus on in Unit 5 once we get to it. So we really are on the cusp of the beginning of the Romantic period. So the overarching ideas we've talked about or looked at as far as that period, but now we really get into how those are enacted by some of the major writers, and of course we spend the next couple of units looking at some of the most important romantic figures, so Blake, Wordsworth, Coleridge, and it's always the case in a course like ours that we can't cover everybody, we can't give equal time to just across the board, it just really doesn't work that way. So in terms of due dates, coming September 13th, the Thursday of this week, Unit 4 is due, Unit 5 then is due September 20th. Again, the discussion board work is a little bit different for the Wollstonecraft unit, where you're doing a little bit of research not on the author that we're studying, but on another female British romantic woman writer. A lot of adjectives in that one. Partly it does make up for the fact that we just can't cover as many authors as we might like to, so as is often the case, the female voice gets submerged in some of these bigger figures from the various eras that we're reading. So we get to spend some time with Wollstonecraft, who is intellectually important for us in terms of that history of ideas, and has this very practical genetic connection to one of the most important writers in the Romantic period, who we don't study directly, but whose impact was enormous and who really embodied that spirit of that Miltonian question of the relationship between the creator and the created. So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Mary Shelley being the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft and William Godwin, himself an important philosopher and writer for people like Wordsworth, in terms of their thinking about the what was called the infinite perfectibility of people, or the fact that you could always be a better person, or life could always be better, which is, again, you can see really fundamental to that spirit of rebellion and revolution that was so sort of pervasive during the Romantic period. So Wollstonecraft and Godwin are really the progenitors in many ways of all of these important kind of movements and ideas and really larger beliefs that inform so much of the Romantic period. But anyway, the discussion board, as many of you have found out and done already, is having us look a little more broadly at other women writers during the period to see what their voices were like, what their ideas were like, what their practical circumstance was like. And I think it's really important to keep in mind as we read so many of these authors that being a writer wasn't easy. I mean, it wasn't the easy way out. It was a difficult life, and to be taken seriously was hard enough, even if you were a male writer. But to be taken seriously as a female writer was just an enormous challenge for so many of these authors. It's really important to keep that in the front of your mind as you're reading some of these works. It's easy to forget, even for someone like Milton, because he's in the textbook, it's almost like we forget that he doesn't know that sitting down to write every night or every day. All those hours you pour into the work that you're doing, it's not like you're guaranteed success, right? They don't know that the other end of this is going to be a lifetime of fame and inclusion in the Brit Lit course. But how often do we as readers forget that these writers don't have the confidence of being on the right side of history, or whatever you want to say. They really are courageous and heroic in many ways, particularly many of these women authors, and someone like Wollstonecraft is just a perfect example. And then looking ahead a little bit, I'm going to just get us into Unit 5 here. Looking at Blake, who was really a favorite of mine and a particular research specialty. I've published a book on Blake, so he's always been kind of captivating in a strange way. Just the oddity of him is, endlessly fascinating. So a lot of what we spend our time on here is not so much like what the works mean or the themes or ideas, although of course we want to talk about that a little bit. But there's equal attention, maybe for the first time here, to kind of the material circumstance of the production of these works, so how Blake actually produced works. And you'll see immediately that they don't just exist on the page of our textbook like every other work, or at least they shouldn't. Pardon me, because most, if not all, of his works had this visual component. In fact, he was one of the first, if not the first, true graphic artist, right? He combined text and image on the page in a way that really hadn't been done before. And a lot of that derives from the limitations of print technology during the time. Like, you couldn't photocopy something. If you wanted to produce many copies of a piece of text, we had movable type, right, and other variants of that technology. But what do you do for a picture, right? How do you produce 100 copies of the exact same picture? Think about that for a while. If you can't take a photograph of it, or some sort of camera photographic technology to reproduce multiple Xerox copies, what do? Part of the answer to that will be revealed in Unit 5. Oh, it's very mysterious. So the other impulse that is so kind of germane to the Romantic period is to move away from the very declarative style of so much Enlightenment writing, and Milton's a perfect example. He comes right out in the first few lines of his poem and says, here's what I'm writing about, this is the topic, this is the approach, and this is my aim and my goal, and basically here's what my poem is going to do, justify the ways of God to men. The Romantic period really drifts away from that declarative, sort of self-assured style, much more towards an interrogative style, a question-asking style. And so Blake is no exception here. And again, very much a question-asking style that doesn't resolve itself when questions are answered at the end of a work. So maybe true to the Romantic spirit, the discussion board for the Blake unit is actually not you answering questions that I've posed, but you developing questions of your own. So it really kind of embraces that sense of interrogative exploration of organic, question asking of always, what about this? What about this? So hopefully you'll find that equally, if not more interesting than the more declarative approach that maybe we've taken before. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little heads up on what we're into right now as far as Unit 4, but also what's on the horizon for Unit 5. Again, some really great work that people are doing for the discussion board, both the posts but also the responses, so that's really great to see. It does make it more fun, to be honest, and I think you are probably experiencing this when you get to interact with classmates. It just makes it more congenial, which is what we're all about here in the literature world. Congenial discussion of ideas. It's like the life of the mind. There's no better life. Okay, so if you have any questions, concerns, comments, be in touch with me. Otherwise, I will see everybody in a few days.